Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro, friends. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by our upcoming assertiveness training workshop that's happening on the 21st of September in Sydney, Australia. Head to mapperforward.org/events and grab your tickets now. In advance, I would like to apologize for any hammering or drilling that you may hear in the background. It's completely unavoidable, and I apologize for the construction sounds that you may hear during this podcast. That is life. Anyway, today on the podcast, we are talking about, that's the drilling I was talking about. But anyway, today on the podcast, we are talking about uncomfortable subjects. And the reason we are talking about uncomfortable subjects is because over the last couple of weeks, I have received an inordinate amount of people saying to me, you really talk about some of the subjects that most people sweep under the rugs. Or they'll say things like, I've been thinking about that for years now and I've been waiting for somebody to talk about it. Or they'll say something like, don't you feel uncomfortable talking about that stuff on the podcast? I find all of these things really intriguing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the backlash that comes with having the conversations that we have. But I thought it's important for me to make clear what my intention is with this podcast and why I have the very uncomfortable discussions that a lot of other people are shying away from in our industry. My driving force behind what I'm doing with this podcast is open-mindedness and assertiveness. Like if I was to chalk it down to two words, it would be open-mindedness and assertiveness. I am trying to not just be one of these people who says, I wish the industry was this and I wish the industry was that, and etc., etc. And I have been that person in the past with things that I did, but I didn't want to be that person in the industry moving forward. I want to create an environment, and I think we should all be working towards, if we can, towards creating an environment where people can disagree respectfully and have the opportunity to talk with each other respectfully about their perspectives. This, if we can achieve this, what comes from that is people learning from each other, is people hearing each other, is people growing from each other. But as Steve Chang and I spoke about on the podcast yesterday, you can't have the utopia that we all wish we could have in the coffee industry without first going through a transitionary period, a very difficult, confronting discussion. And look, the backlash I've received from this has typically been secondhand. And what I mean by that is people have been cautioned from associating themselves with me because Lee says some of the things in the industry that make people feel uncomfortable. So do you really want to associate yourself with her? And it's like, wow. Did you think that my friend wasn't going to come and tell me that? Or did you think my other friend wasn't going to come and tell me that? Or did you think that it was actually going to work when you would say to somebody that you better be careful who you associate with because she talks about the stuff that makes people feel weird? And it's like really interesting to hear those perspectives. I talk about uncomfortable subjects. I feel uncomfortable talking about them. I would love to be the person that's just talking about, how to set up an espresso machine and how to make a V60 and what your grind size should be and all of that other stuff that there are very cool people out there talking about. I would love to have a podcast focused on that. And you don't really need another podcast focused on that shit. But that's not where, first of all, it's not where my expertise lies comparative to my expertise in conversation and curiosity. Through all the things that I've done throughout my careers, through corporate and through the music industry and through the coffee industry, undoubtedly, my best skill set lies in being able to explore ideas and make people feel comfortable in having conversations that would otherwise make them feel uncomfortable. And the success of this podcast is a real testament to that. And I'm very grateful, very, very grateful that we are able to have these discussions openly and with people that I admire, people that I respect, and people that you admire and respect as well. But I'm not going to stop having these conversations because it leaves a vast number of people feeling uncomfortable, because I talk about sexual harassment and I talk about slavery on farms. I talk about the coffee price crisis. I talk about abuse in the workplace. I talk about assertiveness. I talk about employers not paying people enough. I talk about employees not showing up for the positions that they're getting paid for and not showing up with 100% of their gusto. I'm not going to stop talking about these things that we need to be talking about. What you guys also don't see behind the scenes is the number of people that contact me either through the DMs on socials or via email and say to me, I don't comment publicly about this stuff, but I want you to know that I'm hearing the stuff that you're saying and it really resonates with me, and I'm just too embarrassed to comment publicly. There are a lot of people that are saying this stuff. And so thank you to those people for the encouragement. But here's why I wanted to talk about this today. We are heading into times where our industry is going to start rapidly changing. And I know a lot of people don't agree with me when I say that cafes are going to require a lot less employees and more cafe owners need to consider potential cafe owners need to consider not going into business. What I would suggest is that when you look at the long-term strategy for what you want to be doing in this industry, you think about it with a futuristic perspective rather than a current day perspective. And the reason I say that, because that's another uncomfortable perspective that people take. Like, so I'm supposed to be all positive and rah-rah and just tell people whatever the fuck they want to hear. And I'm not supposed to swear, and I'm not supposed to be uncomfortable in the things that I'm exploring. But our industry is going to be shifting very rapidly. And we're not going to do that shifting and transitioning well if we don't get very real, very quickly about the things that are happening. We need to be realistic about the fact that automation is going to take a lot of jobs in our industry. We need to be realistic about the fact that a lot of small producers are going to lose their farms. But we need to be proactive about how we ensure that we create alternatives for our industry to absorb the shifting that's going on. The only shifting I don't want to see our industry absorbing is the sexual predators that seem to think it's okay to lay in wake in our workplaces. There is a disproportionate amount of sexual predators and bullies that lay in wake in our industry. And so this is where assertiveness comes in for me. I am like on a fucking mission to get as many people as possible assertiveness training in the coffee industry. I'm hell-bent on having difficult conversations that make you think, so that you will take those ideas and go and stimulate conversations with your colleagues. I want you to think about these things, and I want you to consider your role, the role of the people around you. What are you complicit in? What are you being presented with an opportunity to shift in? Because if we don't keep shifting, we're not going to keep up with the transitioning that our industry is taking, and we're not going to keep up with the transitioning that culture and the internet and social media is going to be presenting us with. And so if this podcast is something you find difficult to listen to because of the discussions that we have, the topics I cover on the Daily Coffee Pro and on the main Map It Forward podcast, I would invite you to stick around. I would invite you to continue listening and perhaps challenge me via socials or via email, and reach out, and if you feel that strongly about the things that I'm saying, come on the podcast and teach me. Open my mind to your perspectives. But for the love of all things holy, please don't shame people who want to learn and challenge themselves and grow and be uncomfortable with the subjects that we're presenting on this podcast, because that's bullying. And all I want is for us to start thinking beyond the constraints that this industry has held itself in for decades now. I hope you'll continue on this journey with me and tell other people about it, and let's all enter the discourse together, because it's such a beautiful fucking place. On that note, peace, love and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.